Chapter 1. The routine. Nick Gardner hated airports. Not because they were chaotic, though they were, but because they reminded him of how much of his life was spent in transit. He stood in line at the coffee kiosk, rolling his suitcase forward inch by inch, the scent of burnt espresso clinging to the air like a bad decision. His flight had landed an hour ago, and all he wanted was to get home, shower, and collapse into bed. Instead, he was here waiting for caffeine like it was oxygen. He checked his phone. 2 unread emails from his boss, one from HR about benefits enrollment, and a text from his mother asking if he'd met anyone nice yet. He ignored all 3. The truth was, he hadn't met anyone nice. He hadn't met anyone at all. Dating apps were a cesspool. His words, not hers, and he deleted them months ago after the last disaster. Ghosting, heartbreak, being treated like an ATM. No thanks. If he was going to date, the woman had to be single. Properly single. Not juggling 3 guys and a situationship. He wasn't interested in competing with someone's past. The barista handed him his coffee, and Nick muttered a thanks before heading toward the exit. Outside, the November air slapped him awake. Bristol was gray and damp as usual, but at least it was familiar. His car waited in long-term parking, a loyal companion to his nomadic existence. On the drive home, Nick's thoughts drifted, uninvited, to Sierra Morison. College felt like a lifetime ago, but she was the only serious relationship he'd ever had. 2 years of laughter, late-night study sessions, and plans that felt like they'd last forever. Until they didn't. A week after graduation, she'd sat him down and told him she accepted a job offer in another state. He had his own offer hundreds of miles away. Neither of them spent 4 years in college to give up on the careers they were chasing. So they ended things amicably, wished each other well, and walked away. He hoped she was happy. Married, maybe. Good for her. Nick pulled into his apartment complex, parked, and hauled his suitcase up the stairs. His apartment was minimalist by design. White walls, gray sofa, a kitchen that looked like a crime scene with bottled water and mustard as the only residence in the fridge. He dropped his bag, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. Work, eat, sleep, sometimes travel, repeat. That was his life. Comfortable, predictable, and utterly uninspiring. He was saving for the future, patient as a monk, but sometimes he wondered if the future was ever going to show up. He stared at the ceiling and muttered, "Welcome home, Nick." No one answered. Chapter 2. The surprise. Monday morning arrived like an unwelcome guest. Nick dragged himself out of bed, showered, and dressed in his usual uniform. Crisp shirt, dark trousers, and the tie that made him look like he cared. He didn't, not really, but appearances mattered. The office buzzed with post-weekend chatter when he walked in, coffee in hand. His boss, a man who thrived on enthusiasm Nick didn't share, clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Team, quick announcement," the boss said, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "We have a new hire joining us today. She's going to be a fantastic addition." Nick barely looked up from his laptop until he heard the name. Sierra Morison. His head snapped up so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. And there she was, walking into the room like a scene from a movie he didn't remember auditioning for. Sierra looked different. Older, obviously, but in the best way. Her hair was sleek, her suit sharp, her confidence radiating like sunlight through glass. She smiled politely at the team, and for a split second, her eyes met his. Nick froze. Internally, anyway. Outwardly, he managed a neutral expression. The kind that said, "Nice to meet you, stranger." Even though his brain was screaming, "What the hell is happening?" "Nick," the boss said, oblivious to the silent earthquake. "You'll be working closely with Sierra on the new project." Of course he would. "Looking forward to collaborating," Sierra said, her voice smooth, professional. But there was a flicker, just a flicker, in her eyes. Recognition. He saw it, felt it. Nick nodded. "Same here." The meeting wrapped up, and everyone dispersed. Nick sat at his desk, staring at his screen but seeing nothing. Sierra was here, in his department, on his team, after all these years. A coworker leaned over and whispered, "You look like you've seen a ghost." Nick muttered, "Something like that." Chapter 3. Quiet moments. A week passed. Nick and Sierra worked together like seasoned professionals, exchanging polite emails and measured conversations. No one suspected a thing. They were colleagues, nothing more. At least, that's what they pretended. But tension simmered beneath the surface. Every shared glance felt loaded. Every casual remark carried weight. Nick wondered if she remembered the night they stayed up until 3 a.m. cramming for finals, fueled by pizza and bad coffee. He wondered if she remembered the way they said goodbye. Calm, rational, and heartbreakingly final. Late Thursday evening, the office was nearly empty. Nick stayed behind to finish a report, and Sierra was still there, typing away at her desk. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. Finally, Sierra spoke. "So, are we going to keep pretending we don't know each other?" Nick looked up, startled. Then he smiled, half amused, half relieved. "Depends. Do you want to pretend?" "Not really." She grinned, and for a moment, it was like college all over again. They laughed, the tension breaking like a dam. Sierra rolled her chair closer, and they talked. Really talked. About college, mutual friends, the breakup. She admitted she thought about him over the years. He admitted the same. Funny, Sierra said, sipping from her water bottle. I always wondered what you were doing. Traveling, Nick said dryly. Working. Saving money for a future that keeps standing me up. She laughed. Still the planner. And you? He asked. Got everything you wanted? Sierra hesitated, then shrugged. Mostly. Career's good. Life's fine. The word hung in the air like a question neither of them wanted to answer. Finally, Sierra said, we should catch up properly. Outside of work. Nick hesitated. His brain screamed caution, but his heart whispered something else. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. As they packed up to leave, Nick felt something he hadn't felt in years. A spark. Was it just nostalgia? Or something more? Chapter 4. Coffee and Confessions. Saturday morning. Nick stood outside the cafe Sierra had suggested, wondering if this was a mistake. He wasn't nervous. At least that's what he told himself. But his hands had been in his pockets so long they were starting to sweat. He spotted her through the window, already seated, scrolling on her phone. She looked comfortable, like she belonged here, like she belonged anywhere. He walked in, the bell above the door chiming softly. Sierra looked up, and her smile was instant, warm enough to melt the November chill. Nick Gardner, she said, standing to hug him. It was brief, professional enough to pass for friendly, but it sent a jolt through him anyway. Sierra Morison, he replied, grinning. Long time. They ordered coffee, black for him, caramel latte for her, and settled into a corner booth. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the hiss of the espresso machine and the murmur of other conversations. So, Sierra said, stirring her drink. How's life treating you? Nick shrugged. Depends on the day. Mostly work, travel, repeat. Still the planner, she teased. Saving for the future. Trying, he said. What about you? Got everything you wanted. Her smile faltered, just slightly. Career's good. Life's fine. Nick raised an eyebrow. Fine. She laughed softly. You know what I mean. I thought by now I'd have it all figured out. Turns out, figuring it out is the hard part. Tell me about it, Nick said. I thought I'd be married by now. Maybe a kid. Instead, I'm arguing with airline apps at midnight. They both laughed, the tension easing. Conversation flowed. College memories, mutual friends, embarrassing stories. Sierra admitted she still remembered the night they got locked out of the library and had to climb through a window. Nick confessed he still had the playlist she made for finals week. Wow, she said, smiling. You kept that. Of course, he said. It had good music. She tilted her head. And maybe good memories? Nick met her gaze. Yeah, that too. The moment lingered, warm and heavy. Then Sierra broke it with a grin. So, Nick Gardner, are you still terrible at parallel parking? Nick groaned. I've improved. Slightly. They laughed again, and for the first time in years, Nick felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Chapter 5. Sparks and Stumbles. The following week, Nick and Sierra fell into an easy rhythm at work. Professional, yes, but with undercurrents of something more. A shared joke here, a lingering glance there. It was subtle enough to escape notice, mostly. Until Wednesday, Nick was in the break room, pouring coffee, when his coworker Dan sidled up with a grin. So, Dan said, voice dripping with mischief, you and the new girl seem friendly. Nick froze mid-pour. We're colleagues. Aha, Dan said, smirking. Colleagues who laugh a lot. Just saying. Nick rolled his eyes and walked away, but the comment stuck. Was it that obvious? He didn't want office gossip. He didn't want complications. But he also didn't want to stop smiling when Sierra walked into the room. That evening, Sierra texted him. Sierra, dinner? I know a place with amazing pasta. Nick, you had me at pasta. The restaurant was cozy, candlelit, with the kind of ambience that whispered romance even if you weren't looking for it. They ordered wine, shared appetizers, and talked about everything. Work, travel, life goals. Sierra admitted she hated dating apps. Nick admitted he'd sworn them off entirely. Why? She asked, curious. Nick shrugged. Because it feels like a competition. Like everyone's juggling 5 people at once. I'm not interested in competing with someone's past. Sierra studied him for a moment. You always were intentional. Is that a good thing? He asked. She smiled. It's rare. The conversation turned playful. Who was the worst professor in college? Who had the worst dorm food experience? They laughed until their sides hurt. When the check came, Nick reached for it, but Sierra beat him to it. Let me, she said. Nick raised an eyebrow. You're really going to fight me on this? Absolutely, she said, grinning. Equality, remember? He laughed, letting her win. As they walked out into the cool night, Sierra slipped her arm through his. It was casual, effortless, and it felt like everything. Chapter 6. Complications and Comedy. By Friday, Nick was floating. Work was still work, but now it came with stolen smiles and late-night texts. He hadn't felt this alive in years. But life, as always, had a sense of humor. It started with a team lunch. The boss, oblivious as ever, decided to play matchmaker. "Nick, Sierra," he said, grinning. "You two seem to make a great team. Maybe you should take that chemistry outside the office." Nick nearly choked on his water. Sierra's eyes widened. Then she laughed it off. "We're just colleagues," she said smoothly. Nick nodded, forcing a smile. "Yep, just colleagues." But the damage was done. Dan smirked across the table. Another coworker whispered something Nick couldn't hear. The rumor mill was officially open for business. Later that day, Sierra found him in the hallway. "So," she said, amused, "apparently we're the office power couple." Nick groaned. "Kill me now." She laughed. "Relax. It'll blow over. Unless we give them something to talk about," Nick said, half joking. Sierra tilted her head, eyes sparkling. "Is that an offer?" Nick blinked. "Ah." She laughed again, saving him from himself. "Kidding. Mostly." They walked back to their desks, but Nick couldn't shake the thought. Was it really a joke? Or was there something more behind her smile? That evening, he texted her. "Nick, next time, let's pick a restaurant far away from anyone who knows us." "Sierra, deal. But only if you promise not to choke on water again." Nick grinned at his phone, feeling like a teenager. Complications? Sure. Comedy? Definitely. But maybe, just maybe, something real was starting to take shape. Chapter 7. The first kiss. Nick wasn't sure when dinner turned into dessert, or when dessert turned into a walk along the river. But here they were. Two professionals pretending they weren't, slowly unraveling years of distance with every step. The night was crisp, the water shimmering under streetlights. Sierra walked beside him, her coat collar turned up against the chill, her laughter soft and warm. "You still hate cold weather?" Nick asked, hands shoved in his pockets. "Despise it," she said. "But I make exceptions for good company." Nick smiled, feeling something shift inside him. He wanted to say more, something clever, something that would make her laugh again, but the words tangled in his throat. They stopped at the railing, watching the water ripple. Silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was charged. Sierra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't think this would feel so easy." Nick met her gaze. "Me neither." Her breath caught, just slightly. And then, before he could overthink it, Nick leaned in. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, like testing the temperature of water. Then it deepened, warm and certain. And Nick felt years of what-ifs dissolve into the night. When they pulled back, Sierra smiled, cheeks flushed. "Well," she said, voice light but eyes bright, "that answers one question." Nick grinned. "Which one?" "Whether nostalgia tastes as good as I remember." He laughed, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man waiting for life to start. It was starting right here, right now. Chapter 8. The curveball. The next morning, Nick woke up with a smile that refused to leave. He replayed the kiss in his mind like a favorite song. But reality, as always, had a way of crashing the party. At work, the boss called an impromptu meeting. "Big news," he announced. "We've landed a major client. It's going to require travel, lots of it." "Nick, Sierra, you're my dream team for this." Nick's stomach sank. Travel. The very thing that kept him single for years. The thing that made relationships impossible. Sierra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Professional mask firmly in place. After the meeting, Nick found her in the hallway. "So," he said, trying for casual, "dream team, huh?" She smiled faintly. "Looks like it." "You okay with all the travel?" he asked. Sierra hesitated. "It's part of the job." Nick nodded. But inside, panic simmered. They'd just started, whatever this was. And now they were about to spend weeks on the road, juggling deadlines and hotel rooms. It sounded romantic in theory, but Nick knew better. Travel was exhausting, killed spontaneity. It turned people into co-workers first, everything else second. That night he texted her. "Nick, still on for dinner tomorrow?" Sierra, "Absolutely. We'll need the carbs before the chaos." Nick stared at the screen, torn between excitement and dread. He wanted this, wanted her, but could his lifestyle handle it? Could she? Chapter 9. Comedy of Errors. Dinner the next night was supposed to be perfect. Nick had picked a quiet bistro, reserved a table, even ironed his shirt, a rare event. But fate apparently had other plans. First, his car refused to start. Then the rideshare app glitched, leaving him stranded for 20 minutes. By the time he arrived, he was late, flustered, and slightly damp from an unexpected drizzle. Sierra was already seated, sipping wine. She looked up, amused. "Rough night." "You have no idea," Nick said, sliding into the chair. "My car staged a rebellion." She laughed. "You could have just said you wanted to make an entrance." Nick grinned, grateful for her humor. They ordered, and things seemed back on track, until the waiter tripped, sending a basket of bread flying across the table. Nick caught it midair like a goalie, earning applause from a nearby couple. "Nice reflexes," Sierra said, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her wine. "Years of practice," Nick deadpanned. "Bread defense is my specialty." The night spiraled into more mishaps. a missing dessert order, a mix-up with the check, but somehow, it only made things better. They laughed until their cheeks hurt, and when they stepped outside, Nick felt lighter than he had in years. Sierra slipped her hand into his. You know, she said, smiling, if this is what chaos looks like with you, I think I can handle it. Nick squeezed her hand, heart thudding. Good, he said softly, because I'm not planning on letting you go. Chapter 10. The turning point. The hotel lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and ambition. Nick stood by the elevator, suitcase in hand, waiting for Sierra. Their first big trip together had begun, and he wasn't sure whether to feel excited or terrified. She appeared moments later, wheeling her own bag, looking effortlessly put together despite the early flight. Ready for the Dream Team tour? She asked, grinning. Ready as I'll ever be, Nick said, forcing a smile. The week was a blur of meetings, presentations, and late nights hunched over laptops. They worked well together, better than Nick expected, but the exhaustion was real. By Thursday, he felt like a zombie in a suit. That night, after a marathon day, Sierra knocked on his hotel room door. Room service? She asked, holding up a menu. I can't face another restaurant. Nick laughed. You read my mind. They ordered burgers and sat cross-legged on the bed, eating like college kids again. Conversation flowed easily, until Sierra set down her plate and looked at him, serious. Nick, she said softly, what are we doing? He froze. What do you mean? This, she said, gesturing between them. Us. I like you. A lot. But this job, the travel, it's not exactly conducive to whatever this is. Nick swallowed hard. He'd been avoiding this conversation, hoping momentum would carry them forward. But she was right. His lifestyle was a minefield for relationships. I don't have an answer, he admitted. I want this. I want you. But I don't want to drag you into something that's complicated. Sierra held his gaze. Maybe complicated isn't the enemy. Maybe indifference is. The words hit him like a punch. She was right. He'd spent years avoiding risk, waiting for perfect conditions. And where had that gotten him? Alone. Nick reached for her hand. I don't want indifference, he said quietly. Not with you. Her fingers curled around his, warm and certain. And for the first time, Nick felt like maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out. Chapter 11. The fallout. The next morning, reality struck back with a vengeance. During a client meeting, Sierra's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted, tight, unreadable. Afterward, she excused herself, leaving Nick to pack up alone. Back at the hotel, he found her sitting by the window, staring out at the city lights. Everything okay? He asked. She turned, forcing a smile. Fine. Nick wasn't buying it. Sierra. She sighed. It's a job offer. Back home. Big promotion. Less travel. Nick's stomach dropped. And I don't know what to do, she said, voice cracking slightly. I like this job. I like working with you. But I've been chasing stability for years. And this could be it. Nick sat down, heart pounding. He wanted to say, stay. He wanted to beg. But he couldn't. He knew what it meant to fight for a career. He'd lived it. Do what's best for you, he said finally, the words tasting like ash. Sierra looked at him, eyes shining. What if what's best for me isn't just about work? Nick's breath caught. Then, maybe we figure it out. Together. She smiled faintly, but uncertainty lingered like a shadow. The conversation ended there, unresolved, leaving Nick with a knot in his chest and a question he couldn't shake. Was history about to repeat itself? Chapter 12. The leap. Their last night on the trip was quiet. No meetings, no deadlines. Just two people sitting in a hotel bar, nursing drinks and unspoken thoughts. Nick stared at his glass, then at Sierra. You know, he said slowly, I've spent years planning for a future that never seems to arrive, waiting for perfect timing, perfect conditions. Sierra tilted her head. And I'm done waiting, he said. If you take that job, if you stay here, whatever you choose, I want to be part of it. I don't care if it's messy. I don't care if it's hard. I just don't want to lose you again. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, Nick saw the girl he fell in love with years ago, the one who laughed at his terrible jokes and believed in his dreams. Nick Gardner, she said, smiling through tears. You always did know how to make a speech. He laughed, relief flooding his chest. So, what do you say? Sierra reached across the table, taking his hand. I say, let's stop pretending life has to be perfect before we live it. Nick grinned, feeling something inside him finally click into place. For years, he'd been saving for a future. Tonight, he realized the future wasn't something you wait for. It's something you choose. Chapter 13. Epilogue. The future arrives 6 months later. Nick Gardner stood in his kitchen, staring at something he never thought he'd see. A second toothbrush in the holder. It was pink. It was Sierra's. And it was proof that life had finally stopped standing him up. The past half year had been a whirlwind. Late-night calls, weekend trips, and more pasta dinners than he could count. Sierra took the promotion, but not the one that pulled her away. Instead, she negotiated a hybrid role, less travel, more stability. Nick adjusted his schedule too, turning down extra trips that once felt essential. Funny how priorities shift when you stop waiting for perfect timing. He poured coffee into 2 mugs just as Sierra walked in, barefoot, hair tousled from sleep. "Morning," she said, smiling the smile that still made his chest tighten. "Morning," Nick replied, handing her a mug. "Big day." She nodded. "Presentation at 10. And lunch with the boss. You. Conference call. Then, thinking about buying a couch that isn't from college." Sierra laughed, curling up on the stool. "Look at you, Mr. Domestic." Nick grinned. "Don't get used to it." They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, broken only by Sierra's occasional teasing about his minimalist decor. When she left for work, Nick stood at the door, watching her go, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: certainty. Later that evening, they met at the same riverside spot where they shared their first kiss months ago. The water shimmered under the streetlights, just like before. Sierra slipped her hand into his, and Nick squeezed gently. "You know," she said, smiling, "I think we did okay." Nick looked at her, heart full. "Better than okay." She tilted her head. "So, what's next?" Nick smiled, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Not flashy, not dramatic, just simple and true. How about forever?" Sierra's breath caught, and then she laughed, tears glinting in her eyes. "You really don't like waiting, do you?" "Not anymore," Nick said softly. "Not for you." And as she said yes, laughing, crying, kissing him under the city lights, Nick realized something he'd been chasing all along. The future wasn't a distant dream. It was here, in his hands, messy and beautiful and absolutely worth the leap. The church was beautiful. The flowers were perfect. The music was elegant. And Nick Gardner was sweating like he'd just run a marathon. "Relax," Dan whispered from his spot as best man, adjusting his tie. "You look like you're about to negotiate a merger, not get married." Nick shot him a look. "You try standing up here with half the office in the pews." Dan grinned. "Hey, at least HR showed up. That's gotta count for something." Nick groaned. He'd invited a few coworkers, just a few, but somehow the entire department turned it into a field trip. His boss was in the second row, smiling like he'd orchestrated the whole thing. Someone had already started a betting pool on whether Nick would cry during the vows. The music shifted, and everyone stood. Nick turned, and there she was, Sierra, walking down the aisle in a dress that made his heart stop. For a moment, the chatter, the jokes, the nerves, all of it vanished. It was just her. She reached him, smiling that smile that had undone him from the start. "You okay?" she whispered. "Better than okay," he whispered back. "Just, don't trip." She laughed softly. "Same goes for you." The ceremony began, and everything was perfect, until the officiant asked for the rings. Dan patted his pockets, then froze. Dan said, voice carrying farther than intended. "Funny story." Nick closed his eyes. "Dan, they're in my jacket," which is, in the car. The crowd erupted in laughter. Sierra covered her mouth, eyes sparkling. Nick sighed, shaking his head. "Of course." 5 minutes later, the rings arrived, delivered by a breathless Dan and a very amused usher. The vows were said, the kiss was shared, and as they walked back down the aisle, Nick leaned close to Sierra. "See," he murmured, "chaos looks good on us." She laughed, squeezing his hand. "Always did." And as the bells rang and confetti flew, Nick realized something he'd known all along. Life wasn't about waiting for perfect. It was about finding someone who made imperfection feel like home.